Welcome to our Saturday evening Bucky call. It's an eventful call today. We're beginning a new book, um, Amy Edmondson's A Fuller Explanation. A PDF file was sent to you in your invitation. So everybody who got the invitation or gets a recording of tonight's call will have the file in that invitation on the Google Calendar. So it's a brand new PDF file. We're going to open it together and jump into it. And from what I understand, we're going to get some down-to-earth reckoning about synergetics and the geometry of Bucky. So I'm really looking forward to tonight's call. Anne, how are you feeling, and what do you expect from tonight?
Well, I'm feeling very stoked right now because it's been a pretty great week, and we found out the book. It's actually in a few of the bookstores, right? So there's this Taiwanese a chain. It's a pretty big one in Asia, and the book went to #1 in its category. So I'm pretty stoked about that. And then I never realized how the perception of who you are kind of change. Huh? It changes when you write a book. I did not expect that. Okay, I'm doing the same thing, but just because you have a book, it changes. So that was pretty exciting. And then for the publisher, so it's gone to #3 in. I'm not sure what the list is, or whether it's this month or well, I'll find out. But it's been pretty cool. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now I'm more motivated to write the other book that I feel is more detailed in what we have done. And that one is going to focus because we're claiming the spot for transformational education, because you'll find words on that, but nobody really talks about it from that perspective. So we're going to put out a book on that one, and that one will have more details as to what needs to be done. That first one is some big picture stuff, but that one is the next one is like on the ground, what you need to do. So anyway, and then of course I'm getting so much out of our meetings every Sunday and every Wednesday that I don't stop talking about what we talk about, and more importantly is how we're going to be driving this in getting people
head west on Hay Street, turn right onto Collins Street.
Okay, so there. So John, how do you feel, and what would you like to take me today?
Feeling great. Got a few more things done yesterday for our apartment, slowly getting there, and have been for a walk in the park this morning, which is always my favourite start to the day on Sunday. And I've had brunch with my wife at a little Italian cafe, which was very enjoyable. And I'm going to get a chance to use my talents and go off and inform a group of South Americans about the value of wills and the difference between having one and not having one. So that follows this call. So I hope to come out of the call understanding Bucky just a little better. That's always nice to think you might understand him a little bit. And yeah, excited and happy to be here. I actually will be away the next 2 weeks at least. In a week's time, I fly to New South Wales, and I'll be away for 2 weeks. So I think I'll miss 2 Sundays, 2 calls. So I particularly wanted to catch as much as I could of today's call before I went off and performed. So Joe, you gazing at the stars or looking for guidance? How do you feel? What do you have to take out of today?
Always, yeah. I mean, that's always. It's I'm sitting at waiting for a train at train tracks, and there's about, I don't know. I mean, there's been a lot of carts attached to this train, so I've been here for a while. I'm feeling great. Thank you for doing the kind of lifelong education, educating others, John. I think that's awesome. After this call, and I'm excited about starting a new book, and really trying to kind of being able to articulate a little bit better what we know about Bucky and Synergetics in particular. And I think that in a way, what Amy has done is, gone through the simplification process, which is something that I think, we're all trying to do. So it's trying to capture Bucky's concepts and seeing how they apply in everyday life, both geometrically and ethically. So I'm really excited. My voice is, maybe not up to par, but hopefully I'll get home, get a drink of water, and it'll be a little bit more tolerable for everyone. So Richard, how are you feeling? What do you wish to take away from today?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. It's actually quite amazing that sitting here today with everybody and thinking that it was almost 30 years ago that I sat in a room with Amy Edmondson on Bucky's 100th anniversary sort of celebration in San Diego, and went through what I've always described as a adult kindergarten workshop with her, working with toothpicks and gumballs and creating geometric structures. And I went back home to Calgary and to my university teaching at the time, and I made a summary of her book and created it as a reading list for students. And I actually tried to set up something akin to what we're doing right now. I set up a Monday evening or a Thursday evening and said, I'm here to share with you whatever I know about Fuller's work at that time, and I'm going to sit here every Monday night for as long as somebody shows up. And I had some great dialogues with some students. Unfortunately, it didn't last all that long, but it was the beginning of something like this. So here we are, as I say, next year it'll be 30 years since I sat in a classroom with Amy and taking in her way of teaching and knowing her story as to the studies that she went through in Harvard and how she ended up communicating with Fuller, and next thing she knew, she was hired by Fuller, which led to what Joe was just saying a few minutes ago, her attempt to translate Bucky's language, if you want, into something that was a little bit more palatable for the ordinary citizen. So to be able to read through this book under the guidance and dialogue of a number of us, it's really quite exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Back over to you, Steve. How are you feeling and with your anticipation for today and our new start?
Thank you. I'm resonating just about everything that has been said. I'm thrilled that I'm sitting here in a group of people, a small group, but a mighty group. John and you attended that workshop in '95 or whenever that was. And so you've both had personal experiences. Then you, Richard, went out and started you actually made an effort to make yourself available to share and teach these concepts and implement them in your sociology work. I hope I called your work sociology. I hope that's the correct word you like to use. And I think Joe hit it on the head when he said simplification and application, both geometrically and ethically. And I think that's kind of the roundabout, maybe the way the universe is shaped can actually help me shape my brain so that I think more in alignment with the way the universe operates. And I think those words we're all hinting to. So I'm very, very excited. And I have a PDF file that I sent to everybody in the
invitation.
In the invitation, and we're going to open it up right now. and examine it here. And so I'm gonna do some adjustment. I think I'm gonna be able to control this with some degree of proficiency here. I think I'll just run down through the first few pages. We'll start sharing some reading. I've kind of looked at these initial pages to see what will be worth our time and not. A fuller explanation, the synergetic geometry of R. Buckminster Fuller. And it's amazing how many people still say Buckminster, and it's Buckminster. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Then there's a blank page. There's a little page here that acknowledges this action book series. I'm not so convinced that's more promotional for the book, and I think there are some more exciting things as we go here. Here's our title page, Amy C. Edmondson, A Fuller Explanation, Back in Action edition, some notations and citations appropriately for any book, dedication to her parents, and then here's an autographed picture of Bucky himself. And I'm thrilled to call him Bucky. He seemed to appreciate that with people that he bumped into in his life. So I'm taking full advantage of that and consider him thing. Now, this is interesting. This is a summary of the table of contents. Below is a full table of contents, but I think this is kind of worth reading in order to orient ourselves to it. And so, John, if you care to read this table of contents summary, I think it'll kind of give us an idea of what we're looking for.
So we have the foreword, the preface, the acknowledgements, and the notes to readers. And then we have the introduction, a return to modelability or modelability, the irrationality of pi, systems and synergy, tools of the trade, structure and pattern integrity, angular topology, vector equilibrium, tales told by the spheres closest packing, isotropic vector matrix, multiplication by division in search of cosmic hierarchy, jitterbug, all space, filling new types of packing crates, the heart of the matter, alpha and beta quanta modules, cosmic railroad tracks, great circles, from geodesic to tensegrity, the invisible made visible, design science, and then the appendixes, the glossary, the bibliography of works cited, other resources, the index of Synergetics 1 and 2 sections cited, index, and about the author. So,
cool. Any comments on that in kind of presenting? Richard, do you have anything, or is that self-explanatory?
Well, I think it's self-explanatory, and the detailed table of contents actually just expand on each one of those 16 sort of chapters. So yeah, there's so much in here that for us to get started on, it's really quite exciting to be able to venture into it. And I won't go into the details, but when we were talking last week about the triangle tables and the square tables, I was quite surprised that there was a graphic in the book that I found very quickly that addresses that very issue. But that's down the road a little bit in the reading, but we will get there.
Cool. So I think that as we look, I'm going to present these. Whoops, I went the wrong direction. Here's the detailed contents. You see return to modelability, and then a list of, and I think if we drop into that, we'll be going into the weeds. And I think that it might be a little distracting. We might be better off to just jump into the book. How are you feeling about that, everybody?
Yep.
Good.
Sounds good.
All right, so here's our foreword. I don't think I want to miss this. So let's continue.
Would
John,
like
you
to
want to
read
go
this?
for it?
Wasn't he the dome guy? Will likely be the only response from a typical young audience asked to describe the work of Buckminster Fuller. If the audience is pressed to explain why geodesic domes are uniquely strong and economical of material and energy, the probable result will be uneasy silence. Bucky was the dome guy, but there is a lot more to his story than simplified architectural history. Geodesic domes are the strongest structures known per unit of material, and unlike conventional structures, they get stronger as they get bigger. It is possible to make a permanent geodesic dome that weighs less than the air inside it. Estimates show there are more than 100,000 geodesic domes in use in the world today, about 300,000 counting play structures. Far more examples of a basic design than the work of any other architect. Why then is Bucky so little known today? Why are geodesics and synergetics not taught in every college architecture and design department or in mathematics and physics classes? What is the secret of their amazing performance and the pedagogy supporting the principles involved? Amy Edmondson asked these questions about 20 years ago. She concluded that the problems stem from the difficulty many people have in dealing with Bucky's exquisitely accurate but distressingly awkward version of the English language. Even more distressing, his geometry seemed to violate the centuries-old, universally taught rules of geometry.
Let's pause just for a second.
Yeah, sure.
There is quite to do these days about standard education. There's a new university forming in Austin, Texas. We got Ann here on the call. There are a lot of people looking at restructuring education and how trapped our institutions have been in the old ways of looking at things. And so I think that this book is, and us reviewing it, is quite timely. And I just thought that was worth mentioning. Is Eric Weinstein has made a big deal about Harvard and MIT and how backward those schools have been in the way they're training. Go ahead, Anne. What were you going to say?
Yeah, because I like to share what someone actually brought up to me about education. Right, he's an American. He's got one of the largest training for youth in the world, actually, because he trains in different countries and the number, and it's called Seeds Education. At one point, he was also working very closely with the government. I think INSEP was one of them, if I'm not wrong. It's all linked with the education department. So anyway, because he comes to Malaysia a lot, and we used to have him train our students, and it's a compulsory training in Malaysia, and he would come over twice a year, train almost 600 of our students at a time. Yeah. Now, so one of the things because he's involved with dealing with education, so he gave me an insight that I wasn't aware of. He said, right, currently in all over the world, even in America, the whole creation of like the philosophy of education and the how it gets developed, he said they're very segregated, right? So you do not find one philosophy, pedagogy coming out from like the center here, culture and everything, and every subject is developed out of it. Okay, in that same I think approach, okay, to learning. He said in most times it's like people who do science, they're the ones that develop science, okay, and then humanities, another group of people, and then math is another group, and so it comes out. You could have three, but not one that comes from a center. And he told me it's the only one that he has seen. So, so this was very at that time it was very encouraging that we were on the right track. And it was like years ago. I think we started doing this in 2009, but we met him around 2010 and worked with him for about more than 12 years. since until COVID. Yeah. So anyway, I thought I'd share that with you on what the whole the direction. So having Bucky front and center because he talks about science, yes, but he talks about how that whatever we know of, no, actually how the world impacts the economic side of the world and social side and everything. And so that one we are using it to drive the education system or the whatever we are planning as the core to make it happen. Yeah, because even right now, it's like some people are doing it for adults. Okay, and this is the same problem everywhere in the world, right? Universities, some are using it, but they can't impact down to the primary, kindergarten, and secondary children, you know? So I think right now, please let me know if there is a school that actually uses Bucky's philosophy all the way down to kindergarten. I would love to get to know that school. Okay, so I'm quite done there with that.
Really good. Thank you, Anne, very, very much. Joe, you have your hand up. Do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, just really briefly is that one of the things that I think is, obviously I said it in my opening comments, but it was stated just a moment ago, is that how Bucky's ideas were challenging conventional wisdom, essentially. And the other aspect of it is the language that he used was sometimes not always accessible. And I think that this is like one of the most important things is to simplify the language so that it's accessible, as we talked about. And I think that that's something that is not only done for Bucky, but done in general, where we simplify the way we even capture information, understand it, visualize it. And I think that with that type of process where you're simplifying the language, the adoption of Bucky's ideas won't seem as overwhelming or even seen as radical. They'll just seem more logical. Yeah. And so I think that that's a really important point that Amy's calling attention to in the first paragraph. So or first few paragraphs anyway. But I just wanted to stress that because I think there has to be, one of the things that we're moving towards, I think, with a lot of the new tools that we have, are simplifying the complex. So, and language is part of it.
Very cool. Richard, you have a grin on your face. I know we're anxious to get into this. You're on mute, however, so I can't see more than your grin.
Yeah. Oh, well, two things. One is what Anne was talking about in terms of the isolation or the silos in university. I have loved the work of Lynn Margulies and her evolutionary biology work, and the discoveries she made on symbiosis and cooperation versus competition, and she nailed it very, very precisely, saying it's academic apartheid is what's the foundation of our educational system and even at higher education. And I smiled to some extent because of if you want the frequency, we've heard Joe talk about simplifying the complex. And for me, it's simplexing, if you want, the complex. it's not simplifying in kind of the way that we often think of making something simple. Anyway, so I think Amy's book will contribute to discussions along that line several places as we work our way through it.
Very cool.
Mm.
Any other comments or questions? I just want to point out here that this blew my mind when I read this in Synergetics. It was one of the last chapters in Synergetics where she says it's possible to make a permanent geodesic domes that weigh less than the air inside of it. In Synergetics, he talks about floating cities and actually has pictures of these giant geodesic domes floating up in the air. And and I can just think how many people, the lumber industry, the nail industry, the hammer industry, there are a lot of people that did not want to see this thing happen. So, but now here we go. We're trekking into it. John, if you're ready to go, we're starting.
Just one more thing.
Okay.
Who wrote that foreword? Because it's a different foreword than what's in the book that I have, the paperback.
Okay, it's down below, but rather than screw up the pages, I'll read it to you. The first foreword is written by Jay Baldwin in February of 2007. There's a second foreword that's written in 1992 that's written by Arthur L. Loeb. So this is Baldwin. I don't suppose it's James Baldwin, but
no, it'll be Jay Baldwin. It'll be one of his disciples, and
yeah.
And the one that I have is the one that was written by Arthur Loeb, and Arthur Loeb was Amy's mathematics teacher in Harvard.
Well, that'll be the second foreword we'll read, and right now.
Oh, okay, great.
Cool. John, are you there? And you want to?
Yep, I'm here.
With unfortunately.
Yep, unfortunately, the most complex exposition of Fuller's many essential discoveries is found in his two most linguistically difficult books, Synergetics, Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking, and Synergetics 2, Further Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking. Their 1,468 pages are an obstinate barrier to most people seeking to understand Bucky's timeless concepts, and remain a challenge even to highly educated specialists. For example, can you explain this sentence from Synergetics 345.00? Synergetics is marked by section and paragraph to facilitate study. Entropy is not random. It is always one negative tetrahedron. With nobody to help, it took me years to figure out what that important claim means and implies. Ms. Edmondson does not confront that baffling sentence directly, but she does provide the tools necessary to inform a reader's intuition sufficiently to do so. Her unusually detailed table of contents eases the investigation of specific.
Here we go. At the top.
Where are we? I'm looking. Okay, so it serves as a focus for a study of Bucky's major discoveries. This book can be regarded both as a translation and as a key. The clarifying explanations refer to the numbered paragraphs of the two Synergetics books, allowing the reader to switch easily back and forth between Fuller and Edmondson until things become clear. This is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. In the 3 years Amy worked in Bucky's office, she became adept at employing his logic and vocabulary. His unconventional way of addressing classical geometry and other givens no longer seemed outrageous to her, even if his writings were disparaged, ignored, or worse, misunderstood by other authors. Her book also served me as a concise review when I was doing the research for Bucky Works. This new edition of a fuller explanation arrives at a time of increasing interest in Bucky. Just 10 years ago, an online search under geodesics, Fuller and Domes brought up about a half dozen websites, not all of which provided reliable information. A decade later, there are hundreds of sites, many hundreds of links, an increasing bevy of blogs. The Buckminster Fuller Institute has become much more active. The advent of carbon-60, Buckminster fullerene, popularly known as buckyballs, and the consequent nanotubes and their kin have helped ignite a new and rapidly growing interest in synergetics. Bucky did not discover carbon-60, but the visible geometry of his huge dome at Montreal did help the scientists who did so to identify the molecule's configuration. Most of Bucky's insights and discoveries have aged gracefully. They represent experience-based scientific generalizations that are essentially eternal. What has changed and is still changing is a deeper understanding of what they mean, and especially how his way of thinking can inspire further synergetic discovery. Bucky often said that he was working 50 years ahead, developing the know-how and hardware that humans would need to be a success on Earth. Rereading the Synergetics books while preparing to write this forward, I find them astonishingly cogent and appropriate for solving many of the problems facing humanity today, about 50 years after their basic principles were discovered and 30 after being published. With them, a fuller explanation continues to provide the most useful access to the mind and heart of Buckminster Fuller.
Very cool. Comments, questions? We talked about, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, I think I think some of you have actually been a part of or are still very much involved with the Bucky Institute, Buckminster Institute, yes?
Yeah.
Are there schools already working on this? Just to know, or my question is this: is the institute working on a school system or an education track, yeah, that embeds Bucky's all his teachings and philosophy and everything in an education system? Have they started doing something like that? Are they interested in working with people who want to do something like that?
I would say no in the way in which you framed the question. They are working on, a lot of it is in the area of climate change and that sort of thing. And they have a new director who is very active. And so I think it would be very valuable to frame your question the way in which you've done that, and put it in front of the Institute. And, some of us who have had different ways that we're linked in with the Institute could either be your mail carrier, carry your question to them. They are also hold a, I think it's on a monthly basis. I think it's probably the last Friday of each month. There's an open sort of opportunity to talk with the new director, and it's not restricted to anybody other than those who get the link and can attend if they're available. It's usually sort of 12 noon Pacific time in North America. So yeah, I think it's an exciting idea, and I would love to look at it some more too, because in 2002 I worked with a colleague at the University of Memphis, University of Tennessee in Memphis, at a conference presentation at another University of Tennessee place, and tried to lay out how we would use Bucky's thinking, his framework, to build a curriculum in our studies, and how you could teach to the basics And then from the basics, you would branch off in the kind of way that I think you were referring to earlier into particular courses that might be important for students to attend as if you want a separate course, but there was always be a link back to the main framework or the main philosophy, so that there would be cross-fertilization between different courses, and people could see the similarities underneath in terms of the infrastructure and the differences as they're manifested in the different subjects. And that to me would be tearing down the notion of academic apartheid in the higher education system and the lower education as well, as it sort of filters into all levels of education.
Okay.
I just put the link to the buckminsterfillerinstitute.org in the chat. You can click there. And the thing that's obvious to me is that they're not spending a lot of time or effort on keeping it updated. I clicked on events, and everything that is there are past events, and there are no future events on their calendar that I can see in a quick glance. So, because I was looking for that once a month meeting that Richard mentioned, I thought that might be helpful, but I'm not finding the link. So.
I want to say this as well, that I mean, the group that we our group here, for me, I feel is very, very critical moving forward, with the education that that needs to happen, right? So one of the things that I will do is, once I have fleshed out the whole thing more, because there are two groups of people I need, the small groups that I need to have a discussion with before bringing it forward here, is I've got my two my global CEO and my American designer. The design he's a designer, and his designing is not about fashion, it's designing anything, right? So the two of them, I need to get their input, and then the next one is I need to sit together with my daughter and the other ex-student of mine, because we've been the one conceptualizing the education system that we've created, and I need to see how far we can push with their feedback. Then I'll come to y'all, because not only do I see that to get the feedback from you, and also it's not feedback, I feel strongly that designing it, there's going to be very, very powerful input coming from our group. And then the next thing is, yes, we need the voice. And yeah, it would be great if like Richard or John or Steve, Joe, that y'all will put voice to it and help us take it further. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that okay, this one, one of the things that I discovered over the years, trying to make that change, we realized that we were reverse engineering the whole entire education process. So when most people are starting from the beginning, we were starting at the end, right? And there's a diagram I dropped, and this came partly because this Minerva School, did I mention what Minerva School shared about there was this Gallup polls? Did I share about that?
I don't know.
In any of our,
so.
no, huh? Okay. So Minerva School in the US, they have a very unusual education system at the tertiary level for university. Are you familiar with Minerva schools in US, California? Okay. What they did was students study 6 months in different countries. Okay. They're not attached to any university except for Minerva schools. And they're about, and the 6 countries are set. I can't recall which they are. Recently, someone tried to do the same thing, but they link it to universities in I don't know how many countries, right? So they go there, they study 6 months in this uni. But there's Minerva is very different. They do six months, but the students are going there on the ground, working on issues, in that city that they're in, etc. Right? And then they communicate with the lecturers that they have, or facilitators in Minerva schools, right? So when I met them, it was in Hong Kong. They shared these Gallup polls, and this was if you check it out, I think it's in 2016. They did a survey, and the first group they surveyed were the universities. I think the question was about how well prepared the graduates are for the workplace, right? And the academic heads of the universities said that it's 96%. Then Gallup used the same questions with business owners, HR heads, directors, and all that. And what they got was 11%. Huge gap, huge gap. So a couple of years ago, when in 2020, I started my kindergarten. I didn't want to touch kindergarten because I don't know little kids very well, to understand them, to know how they function, because I only teach them English, right? But not the whole curriculum for it. And I don't have a system to even run a structure to run a kindergarten. So I never wanted to do it until when we started our primary school, we realized that kids coming from kindergarten were getting very wrong, incorrect facts. The facts were incorrect, and they were anchoring it at such a young level, and it won't be another 8 years later before you deal with it at secondary level. And besides the facts, it was the teachings that in Asia, particularly in Asia, the Western world, the learning is more interconnected, interdisciplinary, more multidimensional. Whereas in Asia, it's completely siloed. And therein lies the problem, because it started from kindergarten. But it was so difficult to talk to people about education needing to change at primary and kindergarten and secondary. Every time we talk about it, I see blank looks. And some of them will start to tell me, and we are doing it, including our own Ministry of Education. The deputy minister actually told me, no, and we're doing, told the whole audience that they were doing this, and they were putting in all these social skills or the soft skills. And but the problem is it's going to take 10 to 13 years to roll it out. My God, we need it now. It's going to take 10 to 13 years to roll it out. So then what I realized was that the universities and the workforce, whatever struggles they're facing, and the universities complain about the graduates that are coming out to them. Okay, then I realized that, oh my God, it's going all the way down to kindergarten, because imagine if you are, you own a business and it's an engineering, business, and then you try to tell the kindergarten teachers and those who own kindergartens or the policymakers for kindergarten and say, wait, you guys need to change it down here. Or even tell primary school they need to change it down at primary level, or even secondary to tell them that they have to change. And I realized what the issue was. Getting them to change, right? And in a person working or owning a business and the university telling the kindergarten they have to change, the first thing the kindergarten people are going to tell them is, excuse me, who is the expert in kindergarten teaching, you or us? The same thing will happen at primary and secondary, because what the market tells them is different from what the market after tertiary tells all of us, right? In kindergarten, when they teach the kids can get to top primary schools, private schools, international schools. Then the primary schools, my kids can get into top secondary school. So what's the problem? No problem, no problem. Secondary, no problem. My kids can get into top colleges and universities, no problem. But when they come out after university and say, it's not working. And so I do have this diagram where I have to explain to the kindergarten parents and even primary parents why the change needs to happen at a young age, right? So yes, if the problem is like this at that level, then where in the world did the problem begin? So every step says, nope, not a problem, not a problem. So where exactly then the problem is? And And now that you share, that you have just shared, Richard, that you don't see it, the education being dealt with based on the way I framed the question. That helps me a lot, because if then we have not solved the problem just because this has never been pointed out, then maybe our job is to point it out. So what I do normally is to crack it to see where the problems are. Then we realize, oh my God, what our school was doing was we never started from the beginning. We've started from the end. And we're not even talking, we do everything. Even a topic that we teach at primary or secondary, we never start from the beginning. But all education that's been created right now starts from the beginning. Okay? The creation of the kindergarten is created by people who are experts in the kindergarten education, but they have never talked to medical degree holders or the medical universities or institute or whoever teaches medicine. No, they've never talked to them. They've never talked to engineering faculty. They've not talked to engineering companies. So because of that, there is that whole big, and they're very protective. They're very protective over their domain. Very, very protective. So even in Malaysia, let me share with you the horrors of Asia and Malaysia at kindergarten level. Yeah, we created we sent 3 of our people to get trained for kindergarten, because we need to get the government training in order to even get a license for us to be able to run a kindergarten, right? So during the training, because we tend to we do a multidisciplinary education system. That's the only way you can get a transformational education going out of it, right? Then he was sharing this activity that he created using hopscotch, and you can teach numbers, you can teach alphabets, and you can even teach a whole host of other things. All you need to do is replace the content, right? He was told off by the training team. No, you cannot do that. First and foremost, this is not suitable for the 3-year-olds or 2-year-olds. I can't recall. I think it was 3-year-olds. 3-year-olds cannot hop on one leg. Just give me a minute, yeah? Guardhouse, boleh kasih masuk? Thank you. Oops. Sorry. I need to get, okay. Can you just give me? I need to let somebody in through the guardhouse.
Cool.
Yeah. So, but you get where I'm going with it, right? We just couldn't, and the even guardhouse boleh kasih masuk. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So, what happened was they were telling, it wasn't even the learning yet. It's just the fact that 3-year-olds cannot do the skipping on or hopping on one foot. Okay, because at 3 years old they can hop on 2 feet, so you cannot teach them that. That was they were told off for that. Then the next thing is you teach one thing at a time. You teach math, only math. You don't confuse the kids and put in alphabets at the same time. That is how far back we are in Malaysia for kindergarten. Okay, and then across Asia, oh my goodness, you try to tell, we tried to hire kindergarten trained teachers with masters in early childhood in Indonesia. My goodness, they will not look at anything new.
Wow.
They came on board, but they snigger. They you can see that they're not receptive to whatever we're talking about. And then in the end, they decided, nope, they said, y'all don't have to come over to help us here. We know what we're doing. And they completely changed out and turned it into a regular kindergarten in Indonesia. That was our first foray. I think we started in 2019. Gave up on that one. But you get where I'm going with it. So that's kindergarten. Primary, same issues. Secondary, same issues. And whenever we hire people with teaching background, oh, sorry, give me a minute.
Okay.
Sorry, can you continue first? You'll
So-
continue first. I'll come back and join you.
All right, we'll continue for a minute. Any comments on what Ann just said? I have a side comment that won't detract from what she said. Anything on what she did say, or should we wait for her to get back? Okay.
I've got a practical example,
Okay.
which is piano teaching. About 45 years ago, no, more than that, more than 45 years ago, we looked at having our daughters taught the piano, and we were told that they should not start learning until they were 7.
Wow.
Because they weren't physically developed enough to be able to handle the keyboard.
Wow.
So that was the theory of the experts at the time. 30 years later, we explored piano teaching for our granddaughters and were told that they could start learning at 3 years of age because they had developed new techniques to introducing children to music at a much earlier age.
Wow.
So, and it worked. So we had to adapt to a different pattern of belief, which had enabled the introduction of children to the piano at a much earlier age.
Yeah.
The children hadn't changed in the meantime, but the opinion of the experts had, and they developed new techniques for introducing children to rhythm and beat and the foundations of piano playing 4 years younger. So,
You know what's interesting, John? It's I just heard a podcast on Mozart, and
he was a
I
prodigy.
just
What
double
was he,
checked
3?
it. It said that Mozart began to play the piano about the age of 3 as he watched his sister's piano lessons.
Yeah, that's a very good example. Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote his first musical composition at the age of 4 or 5. So obviously 7, we have to wait till they're 7, right? Wow. Totally amazing. Yeah, good example. And I'm sure Richard has some too. I want to bring out that in this writing here, just as an aside thing, that as we just read, 2 things have become obvious. J. Baldwin here is the author of the book called Bucky's Way. Bucky Works, author of the book Bucky Works. That's up here, disclosed right here. And then I wanted to kind of disclose that because I had the question, who was J. Baldwin? And the other thing that I want to point out here is that Bucky often said that he was working 50 years ahead.
Yep.
And I think that came from a very practical application, that he introduced his first ideas hoping that people would take them on. But because of the entrenched institutions at the time, it took 50 years for the institution to evolve to incorporate some of his basic ideas. So it was more of a practical decision because of the rigidity of institutions, which is exactly what you're talking about, John, in terms of we're not going to teach any kid until they get 7 years old.
Well, a link to that, up until reasonably recently, education was based on the perfection model. You drilled children until they got their English perfect or their maths perfect. 100% was the goal. But that's completely unnatural and unreal, because what has happened with good education, it's moved from perfection to discovery.
Yeah.
The purpose of education, one of the great educators, I forget who it was, said, our responsibility is to lay everything out on them lay everything out before them like a smorgasbord, and then encourage them to come and help themselves from the smorgasbord. Rather than we will drill you, you will do your tables every day until your maths are perfect. We will drill you every day on your spelling until your spelling is perfect. But that doesn't equip you for a real world. And we were just talking about 2 things, the movement of education from the perfection model to the discovery model. And one of the examples of the change we were talking about is teaching piano. When my daughters were very young, the experts told us they shouldn't start learning the piano until they were 7. However, by the time our granddaughters came along, classes started at 3 years of age. And then Steve just pointed out that Mozart was playing the piano at 3 years of age after watching his sisters have their piano lessons. So clearly, it was the way they taught and their belief that children couldn't start learning the piano until they were 7. It just took some open-mindedness, some new ideas, some new concepts, some new ways of starting to educate, and children could be taught to play the piano from 3.
Wonderful. Joe, you have your hand raised. Do you want to make your comment now that Anna's back, or do you want to wait till Anna's complete? Okay, Anne, go ahead.
I'll wait till Anne's complete.
Okay, really good. So Anne, we're ready for you to continue. Thank you, John. You have to unmute, Anne.
Sorry, I kind of forgot where I left off.
You're talking about the kids didn't know how to hop at 3 years old.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
So that, and then after that, they were telling us you cannot combine alphabets and numbers, and this is how bad it is. And then I was sharing that. I was sharing in other countries. They also limit the learning. They really, when we talk about dumbing down education, there's a book on that from the US. And
John Taylor Gatto.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got the book on that one. And they actually dumb it all the way down to kindergarten and early childhood, you know. So we even had to talk to our Finnish partners about it, because the Finnish educators for early childhood, they mix it up, and it's up to the teachers, you know, how they are combining the subjects and things like this. But we told them it's not gonna get any buy-in by parents here in Asia at all, right? So it's just that what we do is we give them the subjects so parents can see the subjects. It's just within the subject, whatever we're teaching, then they also know what we're teaching, but we know how to make it multidisciplinary based on the topics, you know. But what I'm sharing is that, well, it's very, very far behind in Asia, not just from the teacher training, the teachers themselves and the parents. So there's a whole load of work we have to do. But never mind, we're gonna do it wherever people understand and are willing to get on board on this. Okay, so yeah, thank you for listening to the.
Just one point before you jump in, Joe. I just hit another button on this thing about Mozart. Mozart wrote his first symphony at the age of 8.
Wow.
He wrote a symphony. Symphony number 1 in E flat major, K16. It's a symphony written in 1764 by Wolfgang Mozart at the age of 8 years old. By this time, he was already a notable wunderkind performer, but had composed little music. Of course, he's only 8 years old, so what do you expect? Okay. Joe, we've got you in on a couple devices. How do you want to comment here?
Oh, good. You're back.
So
He's out of the car.
yes. So, you know, again, I'm losing my voice a little bit here, so I'll just but I think that there are a couple things that are very important to just capture really quickly. And I'll start with what John had just said a moment ago, by moving towards a discovery model. And one of CJ's most important essays, it has to do with cultivating our ignorance, not necessarily just regurgitating answers. This idea of rote learning, where we're just repeating things. It's actually considering what the things we say mean, and understanding the underlying concepts. So one of those things is done. It's done through exploration, and it's just I think it's interesting how we're exploring Amy's book, because one of the things that I think goes along with cultivating our ignorance is also psychological safety, and the idea that you're encouraging people to explore, as opposed to discouraging them. That reminds me of, actually, Anne, the story that you shared months back, or maybe a month back, about your daughter, and how the teacher you know, because she didn't score perfectly, was disciplined, and and that model is obviously flawed because it's going to keep you into the same type of thinking. So from that perspective, I think it's essential to kind of to think about things differently. The other thing is that what Anne highlighted is the distinction between the separation that we've had between education and the real world and reality. And earlier in her comments, when she talked about it in terms of what employers thought and what the students were thinking, and that that separation is, I think, telling into the values of what our institutions are actually pushing on children. They're actually pushing an idea on children and not necessarily aligning with reality. And so you think about that, that is highly problematic when you come into, it's almost as if you're starting behind because because you followed a specific path. And so and in a way, actually, in the beginning of the book, Amy does talk about that a little bit, about how it was a lot of her ideas were based on exploration, or how her roommates were tripping over her tetrahedrons or whatever. But it was, she had some doubts and was, kind of just kept on exploring the unknown. And those doubts and kind of pushing through them, obviously have been beneficial for her as well as, but it would be beneficial for anyone else. And it is one of those ideas of embracing uncertainty, in a responsible way. So I think that what everybody said here is, I think, is really is kind of essential to the future of education. But I do think the rapid pace by which things are changing technologically, that is, and not the technology is the solution. It's never the solution. It's part of the solution. But the effectiveness that is actually achieved through technology and the iterations and how fast it's changing things may force other systems to adapt, and education being one of them. And so from that perspective, I do think that there's a unique opportunity at this moment in time. Anyway, just my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe, on that one. And just to talk about this discovery model, this one was something we discovered many years ago. My daughter was the one pointed it out to me. She said that what we are trying to do actually is classical education. Right. And classical education came from the times of Plato and Aristotle. Yeah, absolutely. Back in the days. Yeah, and it was about kids exploring and discovering and things like this, So and that kind of got lost with the Industrial Revolution and during the Prussian War. As I read the article on that one, very, very eye-opening. And then also in the book, The Fourth Education Revolution by Sir Anthony Seldon, he says that you trace back the tertiary education system. It's all the way back to the time when Oxford University began, and that was more than 900 years ago. Yeah.
And I think that you hit on something very, very important as well. And I don't mean to keep talking because I can't listen to myself even. But the importance of noting the industrial aspect of how that had an influence on education. It's a very industrialized, mechanized model. And it's where you're just going step by step by step. Like you're supposed to learn this, you're supposed to regurgitate certain types of information at a specific moment in time, and not necessarily kind of really explore or understand the concepts behind it, underneath it.
Yeah.
And so I think that that unfortunate approach has been, kind of it's not allowed different ways of thinking into the system. And so I think that fundamentally the approach, the way it's set up, even needs to change, and as you said, Anne, I think, that the models of, kind of, during the times of ancient Greece, that they were much more exploratory and much more dialectical, and dialectical in nature as opposed to heuristic. And I think that that's a very important distinction to make, because I think that lack of dialectic approach to even exploring different ideas is very much a problem with the way we engage each other to solve solutions for politics. Because I think that what happens is there's a dogmatic approach, an absolutist approach that's taken. And that is, well, how could you think differently? So that approach, I think, is it's divisive, and I think it's also it has different ways of manifesting itself when you say things have to be a certain way, as opposed to accepting the way things are.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I don't want to be, I'm your butler, so to speak, John Butler.
Yep.
What's your timetable?
I've got another 19 minutes.
Well, by golly, then let's utilize you.
Let's move along. Yep.
Let's move along.
But this is important. This is important because this is one of the things Bucky did very early on, and I think linked to the death of his daughter, was to, he didn't talk for 3 years. He was in his mind exploring things and basically doing his best to let go of all of the paradigms he'd been given to develop a completely original way of thinking and looking at things. And his Dymaxion map is one of the best examples we've got of that, because he was able to say, I'm able to look at the world in a whole new way, different to the way anybody else has ever looked at the world before. And you see so many different things and you get a different impression. It shows the interconnectedness of the world as opposed to separated continents with huge oceans between them.
Yeah, it's one vertical landmass from the tip of South America to the tip of South Africa.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Good point, John. Okay. Here we go. We're now moving to the Foreward number 2, which was the 1992 edition Foreward.
You want me to read this?
Please.
Foreword to the 1992 edition. In a broad sense, design science is the grammar of a language of image rather than words. Modern communication techniques enable us to transmit and reconstitute images without the need of knowing a specific verbal sequential language, such as the Morse code or Hungarian international traffic signs, use international image symbols which are not specific to any particular verbal language. An image language differs from a verbal one in that the latter uses a linear string of symbols, whereas the former is multidimensional. Architectural renderings commonly show projections onto 3 mutually perpendicular planes or consist of cross sections at different altitudes representing a stack of floor plans. Such renderings make it difficult to imagine buildings containing ramps and other features which disguise the separation between floors. Consequently, they limit the creativity of the architect. Analogously, we tend to analyze natural structures as if nature had used similar stacked renderings, rather than, for instance, a system of packed spheres, with the result that we fail to perceive the system of organization determining the form of such structures. Perception is a complex process. Our senses record. They are analogous to radio or video devices. We cannot claim, however, that such devices perceive. Perception involves more than meets the eye. It involves processing and organization of recorded data. When we classify an object, we actually name an abstract concept, such words as octahedron, collage, tessellation, dome. Each designates a wide variety of objects sharing certain characteristics. When we devise ways of transforming an octahedron or determining whether a given shape will tessellate the plane, we make use of these characteristics which constitute the grammar of structure. The design science collection concerns itself with various aspects of this grammar.
Sorry, go ahead.
The basic parameters of structure, such as symmetry, connectivity, stability, shape, color, size, recur throughout these volumes. Their interactions are complex. Together, they generate such concepts as Fuller's and Snelson's tensegrity. Lois Smirnoff's modulation of surface through color, self-reference in the work of M.C. Escher, or the synergetic stability of gained unstable polyhedra, all of these occupy some of the professionals concerned with the complexity of the space in which we live and which we shape.
The design collection.
The design science collection is intended to inform a reasonably well-educated, but not highly specialized audience of these professional activities, and particularly to illustrate and to stimulate the interaction between the various disciplines involved in the exploration of our own three-dimensional and, in some cases, more dimensional spaces. When R. Buckminster Fuller recalled his days as a schoolboy in Milton, Massachusetts, he related how his mathematics teacher would introduce two-dimensional surfaces by placing lines of zero thickness side by side. Young Buckminster used to wonder how one could create a finite surface out of nothing. Similarly, he could not accept the stacking of planes of zero thickness to create volumes. Intuitively, he sensed that areas and volumes are as different from each other as are forces and velocities. One cannot mix quantities of different dimensionality. Accordingly, Fuller learned to compare three-dimensional objects with each other, and hence to add, subtract, and transform them from and into each other, rather than creating them out of objects of lower dimensionality. In doing so, he came to discard the conventional orthogonal system, which has blinded architects as well as solid-state scientists, and followed natural structure in designing his stable, lightweight structures. 2 days before Harvard commencement in 1983, Amy Edmondson called me from Buckminster Fuller's office in Philadelphia, saying that Fuller had decided at the last moment to attend the commencement exercises, and wondered whether I might still be free to have dinner with them the following evening. Amy had graduated from Harvard with combined honours in applied science and in visual and environmental studies, and had been working for Fuller since then. At dinner, we planned a working session in August at Fuller's Island off the Maine coast. Unfortunately, that commencement turned out to be Buckminster's last, and when I saw Amy again, it was at the combined service in memory of Buckminster and Anne Fuller. We decided right then and there that the best tribute would be a volume aimed at translating Buckminster Fuller's idea and idiom into a language more accessible to the lay audience and more acceptable to the scientist. Amy Edmondson has succeeded admirably in conveying to us not just the idiom, but also the atmosphere of Fuller's office. There were no professional draftsmen, for the staff was minimal. We believe that the sense of a direct link to the Fuller office would be enhanced by reproducing Edmondson's own illustrations directly, just as she would have produced them there. With a fuller explanation, we initiate the Design Science Collection, an exploration of three-dimensional space from the varied perspectives of the designer, artist, and scientist. Through this series, we hope to extend the repertoire of the former to professions by using natural structure as an example, and to demonstrate the role of aesthetic sensibility and an intuitive approach in the solution of scientific problems. Arthur L. Loeb, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 1987.
Cool. Comments and questions?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, and I'm just thinking this through. When we're talking about the visual, visualizing ideas and how they're multidimensional, as opposed to sometimes words are much more linear, and how we were talking the other night about how concepts, not all concepts are in a category, and so a concept can represent a thought, and it doesn't necessarily get classified into a category. Category has a set of concepts that are similar, that have similar attributes. So if you do something pictorially, you can capture a concept in a much more multidimensional way than if you do with a word, which actually can end up being in a category and not being in a category. And so not all concepts are categories, but sometimes when we use words, it's a little bit more linear than using pictorial images, if that makes sense.
It's amazing, Joe, because I just wrote a paragraph on that in my book today, that very concept, that in my meditation, I'm teaching people to not to solidify. Don't allow whatever vibration that's coming into the brain to solidify to a word or a particular image, but to allow it to just process without capturing it and putting it in a box or in a cube, so to speak. Let it flow. We just read that in fact, I think this is really important here as an addendum to this thing. We read that that in doing so, Buckminster Fuller discarded the conventional orthogonal or orthogonal system, which is blinded architects, and orthogonal means at right angles, and which immediately affects relationships, because when they're at right angle, they're fixed, and how that, as if you get rid of the right angle, you lead to stable, lightweight structures instead of cubes that'll fall over, But your point is so amazing, because I just written about this today, and I'd made comments here too about the idea of symbols versus words, and don't allow the brain to solidify on even an image. Allow it to process and stay open, and be open to other connections. Very cool. So, John, just confirming what you said.
No, and I mean, and I think that this is one of those areas when I was talking about the simplification process.
Yeah.
This is what Bucky was doing with the idea of images, and talking about how that is also a better way of communicating in certain cases.
Or the Simplex-ification, if we
As Richard would say, yeah. I think the Trim Tab group that came up with that on a Saturday, I believe. Yeah.
And you were kind of busting a gut there, and also you're on mute, Richard, but you look like you're about ready to say something.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was just picking up on what Joe was saying, and I think the this visual or the pictorial or the modeling that Fuller was concerned about, saying that modeling was used by Van Hoft back in whenever it was 1800s, which got him the first Nobel Prize in chemistry. And Fuller was making the point that this idea of modeling has disappeared in terms of and replaced with numbers and so forth, mathematics, I guess. And so he wanted to bring back modeling, and he also was making the point that Euclidean geometry has smothered Euler's geometry, and his thinking is more on the Euler side than the Euclidean side. But what I wanted to just reinforce in my mind anyway is, again, Joe talking about complexity and simplicity, and I think pictorially, if you had an icosahedron or an octahedron or a hexagon, and you drew all the lines that connected each of the points, you would be seeing, a fair amount of complexity in each one of those. And what the pictorial of a tetrahedron does, for me anyway, it gives you that minimum complexity. So if you were looking at a highly complex sort of network of things, it's going to overwhelm us, or it's going to be hard to sort of see all the patterns. And so if we want to get it to the minimum complexity that is easy to see, that's when you have, you can go all the way down to a tetrahedron and you get this minimum complexity. Or if we were marrying the words of Joe going from complexity to simplicity, I would say we're going from, I don't know, say multiple complexity or complex complexity to simple complexity. And then you stop at that point. You don't get below complexity.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I look at it from, I look at it as complicated versus complex, and we've talked about that here in the past, right? So something that's complicated is very different than something that's complex, and where complicated is there's an element of confusion, whereas complexity is there's some elegance to it, and that enables.
No, I think you're onto something, because complicated complexity is like taking an icosahedron or octahedron and show all the lines in between. But simple complexity, the tetrahedron, that's where you get to the minimum.
Well, yeah, and I think where the simple, though, there's an interesting point here. Sometimes we provide simple, or I would say, we make things complicated by thinking we're simplifying. And that's a very big problem. We think we're simplifying, and then so this happens often in words, is people will use simple slogans to a problem that is actually incredibly complex, not reducing it to its minimum form. But I think you hit another important point, Richard, is that the Eulerian approach and the connections between the things, and the idea of, and I think that this is something that is actually coming to fruition, is even in terms of things like social networks. And if you look at things like graph databases, where you're looking for the connection between things, you know, actually coincidentally, yeah, you would include the observer. You'd have to define the observer. But if you look at a triple store database with subject, predicate, objects, you can introduce the observer. You have that minimum system that you so often talk about. And it's making sure the observer is properly understood. Is that, what does it mean to be the observer? So the element of fourness is really kind of being captured, I would say, in more so in graph databases. And I think that these things are actually becoming much more widely understood. And so, and the reason I say that it's widely understood is because much of the computing that we're seeing obviously is are involving these kind of, you know, essentially graph theory. And so I think we're breaking out of old models in that sense. That's not to say that that the, you know, that it's widely enough known that it doesn't have, you know, that we still have to be educated in these areas. But I do think people are organically coming to some of these conclusions.
Well, the whole point is that that they're getting at in that foreword is this idea of the pictorial representation that doesn't need a particular language to be understood. And there's nothing better than sort of the road signs that are all over the world, and they've got different languages on the road sign. But when I see, you know, something that is the was it the hexagon of a stop sign, it doesn't matter what the language is in there. I know what it means.
Yeah, red, you know, red, green, yellow.
And that's so powerful, and that's what Fuller was getting at around bringing Van Hoff's use of the modeling to make some of his discoveries about the tetrahedron. And it's modeling that the three discoverers of carbon-60 used as well. They used a modeling process to get at their final conclusion of that there was a third form of carbon, and it was this carbon-60. They utilize modeling, and that's partly why they ended up naming the fullerene, if you want, that had to be part of the name of this new structure. They named it Buckminster Fuller because of the geodesic dome that they had been using as a modeling reference to what they were trying to do. And they initially made a mistake in thinking that the geodesic dome was made up of all hexagons. And so when they tried to put a hexagon model together to see it curl up into a full sphere, it didn't happen. It was just like chicken wire. It just kept rolling out, rolling out. But when they realized that the dome was made up of a mixture of pentagons and hexagons, and he recreated the model on paper and put it together, all of a sudden the corners, the ends started to curl. And the next thing he knew, he had this pentagon hexagon mix of a structure that he didn't know what he had. And he phoned or sent a note off to the head of the math department to say, what the hell did I just do? And the math department head came back and said, well, I could give you a lot of names of what you just did, but if you really want to know what you did, you just created a soccer ball. And in fact, soccer soccer arene was one of the names. football arena was another name, and they kept going through all of these sort of ball kind of names until somebody said, look, we got it from Bucky Fuller, so why don't we just call it a Buckminster Fullerene? And the other thing is that the protocol in naming that kind of discovery was such that you can't use the names of the discoverers in the name. It has to be something different. And that's why none of their names got into the name of the Fullerene. And they ended up with this Buckminster Fullerene, which Bucky had obviously nothing to do with it directly, because he was already been dead several years. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, any other comments or questions? Okay, as I look at the book, the next section are two prefaces, the first preface and the second preface. And this is probably a good break, because if we start with the prefaces next week, we'll probably get through the prefaces and the notes to readers, and then the next week we'll be able to start the book. So this is probably a good time to call everything out. John has already had to leave, unfortunately. It's too bad we didn't get his notes in parting. Joe, how are you feeling, and what are your takeaways?
I'm feeling great. I think that this is a fantastic start to the book. I think that this is part of why, the book, first of all, I will say, I thought we were in the beginning of the book earlier when I was in the car. I didn't know we were in the foreword yet. But I think that one of the objectives of the book is something that is being achieved, in the sense that the conversation that we had regarding, Anne's experience in particular with education, and how that related directly to the comments about how Bucky's ideas had not necessarily made it into the mainstream, partly because of the language, but partly because of the resistance to systemic change. So I think, having these conversations about how we learn or are educated in particular are really important in that process, because obviously education is a foundational element that kind of shapes the way we interact with each other and shapes our minds. I also thought it was fantastic that the way John had actually articulated the exploration aspect of things in education, and I put a link to Redressing the Crisis of Ignorance by CJ that captures this very idea, how we're refining our ignorance, not necessarily regurgitating answers. So it's an exploration of the unknown, not what's known. Yeah. And I think that is a really powerful concept. It encourages also mistakes. And it gets to mystique. I'm not going to go on too long, but I do, because I think that the language aspect of the book, on so many levels, whether it be Amy making it accessible, Bucky talking about the symbols, distinguishing these concepts and categories, understanding the nuances of language. I think that this is ultimately how making these distinctions will allow us to, kind of communicate Bucky's ideas in our own way, and connect with people where they are, and not necessarily force them to conform to what we think. So those are my thoughts. So, Anne, how are you doing? What are you taking away from today?
A lot actually. And actually I'm very excited about this direction we're going. Steve, you were the one who introduced that you suggested that we do this book, right?
Yeah, well, because Richard spoke so highly of it, but yeah.
Okay. Oh, Richard was the one who put the book out for us. Okay. So I have a question, Richard. When you've read the book, right? And you're suggesting that we do it together. My question to you is, what did you like? You already know so much, right? And a lot. And at the end of the day, your understanding of Buckminster Fuller is over so many years and with such depth that when you, after reading the book and you're suggesting that as a group that we do it, what was it that you're thinking of that that you feel that you could get out of us doing this together?
Well, yeah, it's a very well, good question. And it actually ties back to what I experienced with her in the workshop in 1995, and that she was bringing a group of adults into the classroom, and then had us starting to work with models, and starting to create models with gumballs and toothpicks. um, and so I was intrigued with that. And when I started to get into her book, where she's also trying to add some simplified language or less complex language, the two of them combined in a way that I thought that in my discipline, that if I could come up with a way to model the infrastructure, the underlying groundwork, and then build a curriculum or courses off of that, students would go out with a common framework. And the common framework that I started working with the tetrahedron, and whether I could unfold it in a way that I could create the domain of who you're working for or with, the domain of the organization or the profession that is indoctrinating you, and the domain of the people that are brought into that profession or discipline, and they have to go through their own transformation of what they were taught and believed and what the system is teaching them. And then you had to see if I could come up with those three are all contextual or networky. And then I had to try and see, is it possible to find a linear sort of methodological expression of the tetrahedron so that we could put context and method together. And that's what really excited me, was to bring the idea of modeling into the learning experience. And when I finally, and I just sent you the paper that we did in Tennessee, but I ended up with a clipboard of the model, and it's laminated. So when I sat down with students, I could say to them, you have an assignment that you've been asked to do, and I'm here to kind of help you or facilitate or supervise. And so we would work with the model, and I would work with them like a coach. So I'd start off by saying, where do you want to start today? Do you want to start with the abstract, just that conceptual framework? And we'll start to fill in the case that you're working with. And once we finish that, we might discover whether or not there's some missing pieces that we need to fill in. Or do you want to start with the case, and we'll talk about the details, and then we'll start to load it on the map. And at the end of the day, we'll also see whether or not we missed anything, or whether we've got a fulsome sort of map on the infrastructure. And so that's what I was trying to do, is to get students to be able to work back and forth between a visual model and the, if you want, the language models that they had to use in order to write up the case or write up their paper, that sort of idea. So that's sort of kind of what stimulated me in the first place.
Okay. Yep.
And
Thanks.
And the
Ah,
last
sorry.
thing was that when I started to teach the model, the tetrahedron model, and I would bring in visuals of it, I had a lot of students who were really quite upset with the whole idea because they didn't understand it. But then I also had students writing papers that said, I hated the model at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, I realized it's my ally, my friend. And in subsequent years, when I talked with former students and asked them what they remembered of their education in terms of professors, books, texts, many of them just said, I don't remember anything, but I do remember that damn tetrahedron, and I still have it in my head. I work with it in some way. So I
Okay.
figured that was a good outcome, teaching outcome.
Okay, thank you. So that means we move forward and we'll see what else we can come up with it. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
got one, yeah. And the other thing is, Joe, we need to talk about we make things complicated, thinking we're simplifying it, right? What came to mind was in language teaching, especially in Asia, they're always getting kids to always have a book. If there's a word they don't understand, check the dictionary. And that is exactly when you said that, it brought to mind the complexities of the dictionary. And I got an example here. Definition of a cat. So you imagine, to a new learner, it's a small domesticated carnivorous mammal with soft fur, a short snout, and retractable claws. So this is, if you have someone from another language trying to find the definition, well, that's what it says in English, right? Then I remember once, I was giving the students this example, just the word brief alone, right? So you really got to know what you're talking about, and the dictionaries it doesn't work it doesn't work well if your English is really not so strong, right? It's wonderful if your language is strong, but people keep directing kids who are learning the language to a dictionary. And I told them, because I got some horrendous sentences just because kids were putting a word in there and they don't understand the usage of it, right? Okay. Yes. Trust me, I got a lot. Then some I blush just trying to explain it, to even share it, especially to a young girl. Yeah. Anyway, so coming back to that one, so the word brief, I said, do you know it also means men's underwear? Right? So you really need to know, it's not so simple that you'll get the meaning that you want just by going into the dictionary. So exactly that called to mind when he said that. So, but the main thing is the whole direction of where we are going. I wasn't too sure where we were going with it when Richard, you suggested the book, but just the foreword alone is already very exciting. And the thing is, just put it out there. Next week I won't be, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna be missing this. I'm having lunch with family, so I won't be able to join next week. I'll just put it out there. Okay, but I definitely want to go through the recording. Yeah. Okay, and so Richard, how do you feel, and what is your takeaway?
Well, I feel very good having just tried to answer your question, because it reinforces the value of going through this exercise now, after having been acquainted with her work for quite a long time, but not always having it in front and center. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to reconnecting with her work. Also, not that I have delved into it, but now that she's such a highly visible and popular person, in writing about the success of failing, that she's and she's in a kind of a business personal development faculty at Harvard now. I just, one of these days, I think we'll find there's something that connects with this book that she wrote about Fuller and what she's doing today in terms of her contribution to the field of education and advancement of learning. So I think we'll find more connections that way. The other thing that's maybe a little bit indirectly connected is that I discovered while we were talking that I had sent 2 papers to some other colleagues, and so I decided to send them to our group just earlier this evening. One has to do with the curriculum paper that we presented at University of Tennessee, and the other is sort of a graphic of the all the 6 different motions that I always think that Steve introduced them to me. He says maybe not, but I I tried to bring the 6 motions into a way of understanding the structure that I had been developing for the discipline in terms of spin and orbit and torque and in and out or up and in and out, tuning in and tuning out, that sort of thing. So you'll see that. It may not make any sense to you, but I just thought I'd, rather than separate them out, I just sent them together. So, Steve, good.
Are you, go ahead.
That's okay. I got it. Yeah, thank you.
Turning it over to you, Steve. And
Hey,
how
thank
are you feeling? And you're getting out the evening.
Yeah. Very cool. Listen, tonight, something was said in this foreword. What I love is the fact that we're kind of like exposing the potential and we're not getting into the weeds too much. So tonight was very good. In this, we just read, the last paragraph says, when R. Buckminster Fuller recalled his days as a schoolboy in Milton, Massachusetts, he related how his mathematics teacher would introduce 2-dimensional surfaces by placing lines of 0 thickness side by side. He used to wonder how you could create a finite surface out of nothing. So now think back in school, they teach you that a line has no width, right? A line is the distance between 2 points. That's the definition of a line, and it in itself has no width. So the teacher takes a line of no width, draws it vertically, then takes a line of no width and draws it horizontally. And here are these 2 no width entities supposedly now creating a 2-dimensional surface. And somehow Buckminster Fuller didn't understand that and thought that was certainly strange. Now, I'm not going to say I was like 70 years old before I was involved with this, but I started taking a look at this dimensionality, and Buckminster Fuller is huge on the fact that the way dimensions are formed is through folding. And when you go into quantum physics and you start studying dimensionality, many quantum physicists will talk about folding, but they still draw those 2 0-dimensional lines together and say, here's 2 lines, and this makes a 2-dimensional plane. Let's add a third 0 dimension, and we'll create a 3-dimensional plane. And so I've taken the challenge, and I'm inventing this little worksheet here. So now we start out with a 1-dimensional surface, and the way you create that is by folding it. So blammo, now we have 2 dimensions. And then what's been driving me crazy is how we fold that into 3. But I have been working on it, and I've come up with the way to fold it into 3. So now my problem is I'm using right angles and 45-degree angles. So what I've started using is doing what I can to get close to that 60-degree angle stuff. But there's pretty close to a 60-degree angle fold. There's a 60-degree fold right here. I'm going to actually build this sheet and draw lines on it and then make it available, because I think this idea for me of creating a 3D reality by simply folding a one-dimensional plane is a very powerful concept. So I'm working on it. And it relates directly to this conundrum of taking these two triangles over here that we talked about last time, and we take this butterfly over here, and somehow we take this two triangles, and we got to fold that into a tetrahedron. And how you do that blows me away. I've had to study it, and the way you have to do it, you have to fold it and twist it. So I'm writing a little manual on that as well. So we end up with a tetrahedron by folding and twisting. I'll do that more specifically sometime here in the future, but I just love reading that when Buckminster Fuller was a kid, he didn't understand how you created 2 dimensions out of 2 0-dimension lines. It just blows me away. So, just how I get to think about the universe in some new fashion. Other than that, tonight was really great. Joe's comment right off the bat about simplification and application, or simplex-ification and application, and the idea of applying those things geometrically and ethically, which Richard built his whole life on, taking the principle of the tetrahedron and apply it to ethics. And I think that this is profound. So I just love the journey we're on. I love the expertise that's coming to this. And I get to sit and watch you people unfold the mysteries to me and for me. Thank you very, very much. Okay, and it's like we're only a few minutes before the appointed time, so we'll continue next week. Any other comments or questions before we go? Okay. See you all next week.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.